Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. My name is Layla Saleh, and I am Head of Research at Demos Tunisia Democratic Sustainability Forum, or in Arabic, منتدى الاستدامة الديمقراطية. Demos Tunisia is a research center and think tank that is a forum for scholars, activists, practitioners, and decision makers to engage in conversations, debates, workshops, and other activities geared toward the promotion of sustainable democracy or democratic sustainability. This is a vision for the quality of democratization that speaks to its political, socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental dimensions. Through expert publications and public engagement, Demos Tunisia emphasizes local knowledge and seeks to deepen the dynamic pedagogic processes of democratic learning and unlearning that feed into innovation and the flourishing of good government at the levels of individual and collective attitudes, values, and practices. We are honored by your presence today. Today's webinar is titled Confronting Occupation and Conflict, MENA Women's Activism. It is the first event in our Women and Democratic Sustainability program. This event, of course, coincides with a very important summit happening in the region today in Egypt to decide sort of what's going to happen and the fate of Palestinians and perhaps other peoples in the region after the biggest conflict, the genocide we've been witnessing painfully over the past 2 years between and where women have, of course, been among the biggest casualties, as we will discuss today. So it is very apposite to discuss women in conflict today and how they are both victimized and exercise agency and engage in, civic and political life where and however they can. We are honored today to have with us three distinguished guests whom I will introduce in turn. So our panelist speakers today are Professor Maria Holt and Dr. Dalal Bajes, and our discussant is Dr. Raoudha Ben Othman. So after the three speakers, the first two speakers, Professor Holt and Dr. Bajes, will speak for about 12 to 15 minutes, and our discussant, Dr. Raoudha Ben Othman, will speak for about 8 to 10 minutes, and then we will have some time for questions and answers from the audience. So please, as you are listening to our distinguished speakers, if you have any question, note it down and send it in the chat box, and we will try to get to your question as time allows. So our first speaker is Professor Maria Holt. She is an emeritus fellow at the University of Westminster in London, where she taught Middle East politics for almost 20 years. She specializes in gender, politics, and violence in the Middle East and North Africa, with a particular emphasis and lots of fieldwork on Palestine and Lebanon. She has, of course, published extensively. Her books include Women in Conflict in the Middle East, Palestinian Refugees and the Response to Violence, published in 2013 by IB Tauris, and Violence Against Women in Peace and War, Cases from the Middle East, published by IB Tauris to 2021, both excellent books. I highly recommend them, and perhaps you'll be motivated to take a look at them after you hear our Professor Holt speak today. She is currently working on a project that examines the negative depictions of Arab and Muslim women in the Western media, and we are honored that she is a member of Demos Tunisia's International Advisory Board, and she will speak to us today about women in conflict settings and how this relates to questions about democracy and rights, and also civic and political participation and presence by these women. So, Professor Holt, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Layla. Um, so, oh, I'm not sure that I can share my PowerPoint. Uh, um,
Would you like to email it quickly to me?
Sorry about that.
Not
Yes,
working. That's
maybe
okay. That's okay. No worries.
Sorry. Yeah, no. Let me try and do that.
Sorry if I may, this is Khalil speaking. There is a green icon at the bottom. It says share at the
Yes,
bottom of the screen.
yeah, I saw it. But it seems that it, it doesn't work. Let me just try and I'm just going to try and sorry about this. This is really, really silly. I should have organized this before. Um, so later, I just emailed it to you. Did you get it? Anyway, shall I start? Shall I start? And maybe we can, if the PowerPoint arrives, we can add that. Layla, did you receive it?
You're muted, Layla. She cannot hear you.
Maria, yes, I did receive it. Thank you. So I'll
Oh,
open that, but
fantastic. I'm
please go
so
ahead
sorry
and
about this.
start. Yeah, we'll catch
All
up
right,
with the
let
slides.
me just start. I'm starting anyway. Of course, you mentioned Gaza. Obviously, that's the thing that's on our minds right now. We're all thinking very much about what's going on there and hoping that there might be an end to this horrible situation. So I'm starting I want to use eyewitness accounts of women in these situations. So I'm starting with an account from a woman who's been going through this horror in Gaza. She says, most days we eat once, sometimes not at all. My younger children cry through the night. I have no answer for them. We have no gas, electricity. So I cook over scraps of wood or cardboard. The smoke makes us cough and sick. There is no other way. I have grown frail and malnourished. I starve myself so my children can eat. This is what survival has become. Children are traumatized. They no longer ask about school. They only ask if they will eat tomorrow. Every attempt to get food feels like another world. Um, she says, my dreams are not complicated. I want my children to be safe, to eat until they are full, to return to their studies and to grow up with dignity. So this is the account from this is a woman in Gaza, and so I'm saying here that Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza, according to a report by Oxfam, has killed more women and children, as I'm sure we're all very much aware, than any other conflict recently. So, of the more than 67,000 people killed since October 2023, it's estimated that nearly 70% of them have been women and children. So, it's a situation of absolute horror. With infrastructure almost entirely destroyed, whole families wiped out, and no one in the world, it seemed no one was really willing to intervene. So
And
as this
okay, I'll tell
woman's,
you when I talk to you later in this meeting, right?
sorry. So as this woman's testimony reveals, despite the trauma of what she's been through, she continues to struggle to find food to keep herself and her children fed. And there are so many stories like this emerging from Gaza, but also from other situations. For example, we have an example of a woman called Zahra from Sudan. So she told her story. So she spoke about my transition from Sudan to Chad was brutal, marked with uncertainty and an overwhelming sense of sadness. I witnessed violence and human rights violations against my community, including rape, killing, burning, displacement, and torture of women, children, men. The scenes were indescribable. So before the war, this woman worked for an organization dedicated to the reduction of gender-based violence. But after the conflict started, She was uprooted from her home, and she lost everything, all her possessions, and her her comfort, her sense of security. But she survived, and she acknowledged her feelings. She relied on friends, her faith, support groups to ease the isolation she was experiencing. And she cultivated hope by reminding herself that the hardships would pass one day. In the meantime, she set long-term goals for her children, for her family, and for her community. So as Layla mentioned, I've interviewed many women throughout the Middle East and North Africa over many years. So women of all ages and different parts of life who support similar stories of survival and resilience in extraordinarily challenging circumstances. And sometimes they sound like very small things, but taken together, they start to build a picture of women's coping strategies. So in this presentation, which I think must be very brief, so I want to focus on three specific aspects of crisis. So first of all, women's refusal to internalize an identity solely defined by victimization. Secondly, their willingness to engage in acts of resistance. And thirdly, the comfort and empowerment that they're able to derive, some of them, from Islam and Islamist activism. So these are my three arguments. You can see them. So in situations of violence, which disrupt familiar patterns, but they can also create new opportunities for women. Secondly, I've discovered that some women have been empowered by Islamic forms of activism, which enable them to play a more assertive role. And thirdly, by resisting violence, women are able to strengthen the larger communal identity. So according to the European Commission, in times of complex crisis, when normality is shattered by the brutal consequences of an all-out war that leaves no one safe and forces scores of people to displace, women and girls become extremely exposed to risks of all kinds. And much attention, as I'm sure we're all aware, in recent years has focused on the crisis of sexual violence, especially rape suffered by women and girls during periods of war. But less attention has been given to some of the other issues that the effect of armed conflict on women, such as the terrible consequences of forced migration, the loss of family members, especially children, and the removal of a secure environment, such as we've seen in Gaza and in southern Lebanon also recently. And Yemen is another example where all parties to the conflict have been accused of systematically violating women's freedom of movement. According to Human Rights Watch, these restrictions have a terrible impact on women's lives and impede their ability to get healthcare, education, and work, and even to visit their families. And a woman in Taiz spoke of the challenges faced by her sister who lives in Sana'a. And she said she's a woman in her 50s and was forced to get approval from her son, who was 14 years old, to travel. And she said that means that the Houthis don't recognize women as full citizens. According to the UN, the conflict in Yemen is driving up forms and instances of violence, exploitation, and harmful coping strategies. The psychological, economic, and security pressures, some men more violent towards their wives. Due to fear, women are more likely to stay at home, which increases the incidence of violence. And additionally, legal services are hindered, leading to impunity of perpetrators, which encourages perpetrators of violence to continue. So we can see that that's also happened in Gaza. So according to a Palestinian lawyer, the war has severely impacted Gaza's judicial system. She said women's ability to access justice during this war has led to an increase in rates of violence. This war has helped men evade giving women their rights because of the absence of police and courts. Many men have stopped granting rights to women, such as expenses or child support. So the three theoretical approaches that I'm using for this presentation is, first of all, violence against women as a human rights issue and also a global crisis. I'm also discussing Orientalism as a form and provoker of violence against women, and patriarchy as a structure and form of violence. So it's important to recognize that although disproportionately victimized by violent conflict, women should not be categorized solely as victims. For example, Israeli attacks against Lebanon in 2024 meant that people's lives were turned upside down. Women found themselves in charge of most, if not all, day-to-day activities. A woman forced to flee with her husband and 2 children from Baalbek testified that she developed certain coping mechanisms. In her opinion, Lebanon's recovery and the rebuilding of society after the war must be led by women. Women are the best peace builders and community leaders. In Syria, too, the conflict has affected women and girls' ability to enjoy their most basic rights, for example, the right to food and health. During the conflict, all types of sexual and gender-based violence has reportedly increased. In addition, women and girls living in prolonged displacement due to conflict, often in camps, survive under exceptional hardship. At the same time, numerous Syrian women's rights and civil society organizations are fighting to raise awareness in areas such as women's human rights, gender equality, and non-discrimination. So this brings me to the debate on female agency in Muslim majority settings, which is sometimes, for some women, inspired by Islamist politics and is often underestimated in Western societies, including by Western feminists. When I interviewed women in Lebanon and Palestine regarding their feelings about this kind of Islamic resistance, I heard some quite strong opinions. For example, a woman in her 20s with 4 children living in the south part of Beirut told me that she supports the Islamic resistance and would prefer Lebanon to become an Islamic state. For her, the resistance means everything. It provides dignity and empowerment for women and men alike. And a Lebanese academic agreed. So she said religion has empowered women in Lebanon, enabling them to play a full part in resisting the Israeli occupation and invasion, for example, by engaging in relief and humanitarian work. So in 2006, participating for the first time in Palestinian elections, Hamas won the majority of votes and attempted to form a government in the West Bank and Gaza. And at that time, both before and during the election, as campaigners and voters, women played an important role and were one of the groups named as influential in helping Hamas to win the election. And so I went there soon after that to conduct research and to ask women about their feelings about Hamas and their role in the election and the political process. And many women of all ages, I spoke to all sorts of women, including older women, students. A lot of them spoke very positively about the importance of Islamism in political and social systems. For example, a woman in her 40s in Balata refugee camp in Nablus, she said the role of Hamas is very broad. They're regarded as strong and important. An academic at Bislett University said Hamas worked with women before the election. They used to target conservative girls. They were trying to build a model human being, to be a model for others, to work hard, to be modest and helpful. And this was attractive to women. And a student at the same university, she said women voted for Hamas because they need to see change in all aspects of life. Islamic movements look beyond women's bodies to their minds, and this is attractive to women. So this raises the question of the relationship between women's relationship with Islam and Islamism. Where is the female narrative empowerment, especially at a time when in the West, Islamist activism is primarily linked to terrorism? And judging from my own research, I believe that women in Gaza are empowered by their religion on 2 levels, as a source of comfort and a form of activism. And it would be a mistake to assume that women are merely acted upon and possess no agency of their own. So despite suffering, displacement and victimization, many women have also been able to access new opportunities. For example, a Palestinian woman from Syria now sharing one small room in Burj al-Barashni camp in Beirut with her 2 adult sons. She told me that she started her own business. She's now selling clothes in the camp, and so she's starting to generate a small income for her family. And another woman living in the same camp who fled from rural Syria and she was unschooled. She had no education, but now she's become very proud that her daughters have been able to access an education in Beirut. So to conclude, I'm sorry, I'm probably going on too long, so I'll conclude. So I came to 3 conclusions from all of this. First of all, although women, whatever their economic or social status, do tend to suffer disproportionately during periods of violent conflict, but they also do, in many cases, develop coping strategies, coping mechanisms that enable them to survive and support their families. But of course, this is not always the case, as we've seen in the horrific situation in Gaza, where large numbers of women have been killed, permanently maimed, or lost loved ones. Secondly, I think the international system plays a vital role, but it needs to be reformed in order to enable women to play a more prominent role. We can see that current arrangements, usually led by male policymakers and armies and militaries, are not working. And we had UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security that provided a critical tool for moving the gender equality agenda forward. So we must support and get back to that. And my final conclusion is that although Islamist politics have been discredited for many people in the West as a result of Hamas's attack on Israel, I believe it's still relevant and valuable response for many women to the violence of conflict. And, as I said, it can also be used as a tool of activism. So I just wanted to end again with the words of another woman in Gaza. She said, these past months were among the hardest we have ever endured, especially after the latest Israeli incursion. We faced indescribable fear, starvation, and forced displacement. The psychological toll was beyond words. In those days, the northern areas were completely deserted, like a lifeless city. We longed for even a fleeting moment of safety. Despite the loss and devastation we have suffered, we hold on to our resilience and our unwavering belief in our right to life and dignity. This experience will forever be etched on our memory, leaving lasting psychological and physical scars, yet it will never break our will to survive and persevere. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I went on a little longer.
That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Holt, for your very rich presentation and on the women of Palestine and Gaza and also elsewhere in the region. And your focus on women's stories is really important, I think. And Christine Sylvester talks about, studying war as experience, and stories are really an important way to do that. And I urge everyone to, consult and read Professor Holt's publications and to get more of these, firsthand accounts and stories. So our next speaker is Dr. Dalal Bajes. Dr. Dalal is a Palestinian sociologist and activist. She holds a PhD in sociology from Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul. Currently, as a faculty member at Ibn Khaldun University. She is teaching a course on the sociology of resistance. So this is very fitting to our topic today. Dr. Dalal has authored 6 monographs, including the role of music in political socialization within the Islamic movements, and in 2014, and Islamist women in the Arab world, from reaction to new reality. And Dr. Dalal's research underscores a commitment to exploring resistance dynamics and political empowerment within the context of the global South. She will speak to us today specifically about Palestine and Palestinian women in Palestine and occupied Palestine and also in the diaspora. So Dr. Dalal, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Layla. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for this invitation. It's a pleasure to join you and reflect together on the instructions of gender, resistance, and colonial violence in our region. And more specifically in the Palestinian context. Before I begin, Nani, I want to express my deep sense of emotion and hope at this moment. Like many Palestinians, I'm filled with relief and gratitude at the sight of my people celebrating the ceasefire and the release of prisoners, a long-awaited glimpse of justice and dignity. These moments remind us that liberation is not a distant dream, but a lived collective pursuit. At the same time, my joy is mixed with sorrow. Many of the women I've interviewed, mothers, daughters, and wives of prisoners, were longing for this moment, preparing themselves to reunite with their loved ones. Yet, some of them will not be able to. Their absence weighs heavily in my heart today. We might say that genocide in our homeland has stopped, but in truth, we know that violence often changes its form rather than disappearing. It shifts from bombing to blockade, from physical destruction to psychological warfare. And once again, it is Palestinian women who are standing at the center of this transformation, carrying the burden of loss while leading the work of healing, rebuilding, and renewing life. We're entering a new phase of resistance in Palestine, one that will undoubtedly bear the mark of women. They are ones who hold families together, who mourn and mobilize, who turn grief into strength and displacement into belonging. Their stories are the beginning and the construction of our collective struggle for liberation. Then I want to begin my acknowledgement by acknowledging a tension that many of us as researchers of women experiences in context of war and occupation constantly face, the tension between highlighting vulnerability and recognizing agency. Much of the scholarship and media discourse on women in conflict zones, particularly in the Arab region, tends to emphasize harm, trauma, and victimhood. While these are undeniable realities, an exclusive focus on suffering risks, silencing the everyday and extraordinary ways women act, organize, and resist within systems designed to crush them. In my work, both in my doctoral research on the Islamic bloc, Al-Kutla al-Islamiyya, in Palestinian universities, and in my current postdoctoral projects, I've tried to reframe the question rather than asking whether women are victims or agents. I ask, how does agency manifest through vulnerability itself? And what does it mean to resist from within a condition of permanent disposition? Well, when we study women under occupation or during war, we often find that their resistance is not always spectacular or visible. It's subtle, embodied, and sustained through ordinary acts, raising children under siege, teaching in universities that are military raided, writing, documenting, or simply insisting on staying. In my research on Palestinian women prisoners, for instance, I've found that the body becomes both the target and the tool of resistance. Imprisonment tries to strip women of agency through surveillance, humiliation, and isolation. Yet, women respond through hunger strikes, collective discipline, coded communication, and spiritual endurance. Here, vulnerability does not negate agency. It produces it. The prison, rather than being a site of total domination, becomes a laboratory of political subjectivity. This approach is inspired partially by thinkers like Sabah Mahmoud, who asked us to rethink agency, not only as resistance to power, but as a capacity to inhabit norms and constraints differently, and partially by the testimonies of women themselves, who reject being portrayed as passive victims. They often say, we resist through patience, sabr, through dignity, through knowledge. So resistance is not only in protest, it's in the ethical stance of surviving with integrity under a settler colonial regime that thrives on dehumanization. For Palestinian women and many women across conflict zones in the region, the political is inseparable from intimate. Acts of care, teaching, mourning, or even remembering are forms of civic and political engagement. This reframing is crucial because it helps us move beyond the humanitarian lens that sees women only as to be saved and toward the decolonial feminist lens that recognize them as makers of history. The Palestinian case is distinct from other conflicts because it is not a war that has a beginning and end. It is a continuous condition of occupation, what many scholars and activists describe as ongoing Nakba. This continuity has profound implications for how women experience and interact resistance. Palestinian women live at intersection of colonial, patriarchal, and carceral systems, yet they are not merely reacting to violence, they are sustaining life under it. In my dissertation, I explored how the Islamic student movement, for example, particularly the women's wing in the Islamic bloc, Al-Kutla Al-Islamiyya, navigated their overlapping structures. In universities like Bir Zayt, the Islamic University of Gaza, and others, women students organized elections, cultural events, religious study circles, and social initiatives, often under severe restrictions and threats of arrests. These young women embodied a unique form of civic agency. They transformed the university itself under colonial surveillance into a microcosm of liberation politics. Through religious ethics, community solidarity, and social work, they blurred the boundaries between faith, education, and political struggle. What struck me most in their narratives was how they saw their activism not as an exception, but as a duty, a continuation of their mothers' and grandmothers' roles in preserving Palestinian identity during displacement. This intergenerational sense of continuity reflects the particular temporality of Palestinian resistance. It is not let's say, episodic, like in other wars, but continuous, carried through memory, through language, through a mundane. Women in refugee camps, for example, have turned embroidery, oral storytelling, and even domestic spaces into archives of the homeland. Others engage in political education, digital advocacy, or prisoner support networks, all forms of resistance that sustain the nation in exile. So when we talk about women in the ongoing Nakba, we are talking about women who are holding society together under conditions where the state itself is absent. Their activism is not always visible as protest. It's often politics of care, endurance, and faith that maintains the social fabric amid rupture. Finally, if we turn to the diaspora, we see another layer of complexity and creativity. Palestinian women in exile, whether in Arab region, Europe, and North America, face the challenge of belonging to a homeland they can't physically access, while carrying its memory and meaning across borders. Diaspora women engage in activism through academic work, art, community organizing, and digital advocacy. They create bridges between local struggles and global movements, from Black feminists through the indigenous decolonial activism. Here, I can speak from a personal experience. As a Palestinian scholar working in Turkey, I've often felt this double position as someone inside the region, but also somewhat in exile. This position brings both freedom and responsibility. Freedom to speak and write with some distance, and responsibility to represent our communities ethically and coherently. In my current postdoctoral research, I look at how artificial intelligence, for example, and digital technologies are used as tools of surveillance and control, but also how activists and communities, including women, subvert these same technologies to document, remember, and resist. In other projects, I explore digital limitations, the way Palestinian women transform mooring online into a collective act of remembrance and defiance. These digital testimonies, often written in the language of grief, become political archives that resist erasure. Women in diaspora also play a crucial role in translating the struggle, literally and metaphorically, to different audiences. They create exhibitions, publish academic work, engage in solidarity campaigns, and build networks that connect Palestine to broader struggle of justice. But diaspora life is not only about activism. It's about emotional negotiation of guilt, distance, and longing. Many women describe living in a portable exile carrying Palestine within them as a moral campus. So when we speak of diaspora activism, we are also speaking about effective labor. The labor.
ركز معي.
Excuse me?
Dr. Dalal, it's
Sorry.
okay. Continue, please.
Sorry.
Okay. Sorry. So when we speak about diaspora activism, we are speaking about active labor, the labor of remembering, caring, and keeping Palestinian present in the world's conscience. Before I conclude this section, I would like to speak briefly about an initiative that is very close to my heart, the Tamkeen Foundation, which I co-founded with other colleagues in 2018. Tamkeen began as a feminine youth initiative born from a simple dream to create a space where Palestinian women, especially those living in conflict zones, could grow, connect, and support one another. Our vision was to empower women scientifically, socially, legally, and practically by providing tools and mentorship that could help them navigate both personal and professional challenges. Through the Tamkeen social platform, we have worked to bridge opportunities with women's competences, allowing talented young women to pursue education, launch initiatives, and strengthen their civic and intellectual presence. For me, Tamkeen represents more than a foundation. It is a form of resistance, a constructive resistance that builds, heals, and uplifts. Along with my sisters and colleagues, we have chased this dream with persistence despite the harsh realities in Palestine. And today, we are proud to have supported hundreds of Palestinian young women in realizing their ambitions, finding their voices, and becoming contributors to their communities and to our shared nation coast. So it has been one of the most meaningful extensions of my academic and personal journey, a reminder that even under siege, we can still create spaces of empowerment, learning, and hope. To conclude, across all these spaces, prison, university, refugee camp, and diaspora, Palestinian women have shown that agency is not the opposite of suffering. It's the capacity to transform suffering into meaning and meaning into movement. Their resistance takes many forms: intellectual, spiritual, emotional, and political. It challenges both the colonial state that seeks to erase them and the humanitarian gaze that seeks to pity them. Ultimately, Palestinian women are not marginal to the story of resistance. They are its moral and political center. Their lives remind us that liberation is not only about reclaiming land, but also about reclaiming narrative, dignity, and continuity. And perhaps this is the lesson that transcends Palestine, that even in the most constrained circumstances, The human capacity for solidarity, care, and creativity remains unbroken. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dalal, for this insightful presentation on the ongoing Nakba and Palestinian women, and drawing on your own experiences and highlighting the significance of that positionality and recognizing that lens to research. Thank you very much. Now, to comment on both of these fine presentations, we have Dr. Raoudha Ben Othman, our colleague from Tunis. She teaches linguistics at the University of Tunis. Dr. Raoudha Ben Othman has researched aspects of quality in higher education and published widely on this topic in both academically and in local papers. In the years since the Tunisian Revolution, of course, 2011, she has researched women's and young people's conceptions of democracy and democratic transition, and we will get to this, link between violence and conflict and democratic aspirations, perhaps in the discussion, and perhaps in Dr. Ben Othman's comments. Please, Dr. Raoudha, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Layla. Thank you, everybody. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we
Okay,
can.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you, really, Dr. Maria, Dr. Dalal, for these very important and insightful presentations. We heard Dr. Maria talking about generally women violence in the MENA region and suffering, and Dr. Dalal so patiently talking about the experience of Palestinian women. We are all aware or trying to be aware of what is going on, but you said it rightly. What is really being lived there is beyond even the imagination of people who are outside. Our hearts are with all of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. And I would like to take this opportunity not really to repeat what you have said, both of you, about the violence and the suffering. I would like just to throw a couple of questions, because I am really interested to see that both of you have talked about women voice in these special circumstances, and how resistance is taking many forms. However, my question, if I may, is how are we going to think of voice when we know that, as you said, survival on the ground will oblige women to resist. They are resisting for the life of their children, for their own lives. And when we talk about voice generally, can we just think about all of these ruptures of education, all of these young girls and boys who have been deprived of schools and about deprived of lessons? How are we going to make sure? I mean, when I say here we, I'm just thinking of the Palestinian mothers and all other mothers living in these horror and these trauma. How are they going to make sure that their daughters and the new generation is going to be educated to a level that is going to enable them carry on and finding their voice at the same time? Can we expect, I'm just asking the question, I know that there has been research on it generally, can we expect that more girls during war and violence are deprived of education than boys? I'm just asking this question without any kind of hypothesis. I just think that maybe more girls are more deprived. And how do mothers actually, how can you imagine a mother with a limited education or maybe with no education? I know generally that Palestinians have a very high level of education, but I think generally of all the women, like in Sudan or in Yemen, how are they going to make sure that they are turning this resistance into a new form, and that they are not only fighting for the lives of themselves and their families, but also for a voice in the future? Can education play any role there? And when I am listening to both presentations, I heard Dr. Maria Holt talking about all of the interviews, and also Dr. Dalal talking about all of these interviews you have been carrying with different women. Maybe with Dr. Dalal, you are focusing more on Palestinian women, and that's quite understandable. But Dr. Maria has had the maybe a privilege of talking to more women. I know that she interviewed Libyan women. She's said that she interviewed also Sudanese and Yemeni women. How are we going to expect that all of these research methods that are the legacy of a certain type of feminism all over the world, how are we going to expect that the same research methods are going to enable us uncover all of these possibilities, challenges, threats, hidden voices, real suffering on the ground? Maybe we think also that the research themselves will look at this context of agency, voice, suffering in the whole region and re-evaluate the research methods themselves. We all learned from a new feminism and from the literature at a certain time. Maybe this is an occasion in order to re-evaluate, because Dr. Maria has got the courage of talking about voice and how women are opting for Islamist parties or for Islamism, if we may describe this as Islamism, in order to ask for a new opportunity, which is a picture very different from what the West is describing anything to do with Islam or with Islamic resistance or Islamic forms of political behavior. I know that there will be a lot of questions, even from my friends and colleagues in Tunisia who have been so into at least state feminism or at least non-religious feminism. So I'm just throwing these questions and I hope that they are going to, maybe to answer my queries and maybe other people's queries in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raoudha, for your incisive questions. And you actually brought up an angle that I was thinking about myself, which is, it's a good question. What about the sort of the less optimistic side, the less sunny side of agency? What about survival? What do women do when they are, as you said, caught up in trying to survive them and their children? And is considering voice and agency and political presence and all of these important sort of phenomena or kinds of behavior in more stable contexts, perhaps? What does it look like in conflict settings, or what is the difference perhaps between violent and nonviolent places, or temporalities, perhaps geographies, societies, etc. So this is an important question. Perhaps the speakers can each take a turn at trying to answer it, and also the second comment about research methods and how do we go about doing this kind of research ethically in conflict zones with women, with all kinds of interviewees, and perhaps considering feminism or feminisms, as Lucy Delap has a book on, I think called Global Feminisms in the plural. There's some recognition these days that maybe feminism doesn't just look like one thing. If one chooses to identify as a feminist, which in the Arab region is not always the case, even among women activists. And that's another topic to discuss, perhaps another time, perhaps today, I don't know. So we'll give the speakers perhaps a couple of minutes each, or to maybe respond to Dr. Raouda's points. And then we'll move to questions from the audience. We have one question so far in the chat box. I encourage everybody else in the audience to please share any questions you might have in the chat, and we will be privileged to hear some response from the speakers. So Professor Holt, please, if you have any ideas to share after listening to Dr. Raouda.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Ben Othman. Thank you. I mean, these are very important questions and very difficult questions also, I think. I mean, it's important to raise them, and it's important to think beyond this idea of what comes next, what happens once the conflict has supposedly ended. Although I think in the Palestinian case, it's very problematic to talk in those terms. The conflict really doesn't end. It's very much, as Dr. Dalal very clearly said, it's an ongoing Nakba. It's this is. I think there are kind of two ways of looking at it. I mean, from an optimistic perspective, as I think both of us alluded. I mean, we talked about the survival, the coping mechanisms, the will to survive, the strength, the resilience of, for example, Palestinian communities, and especially of women. So there is this sense that one always gets, and when I've interviewed all kinds of women in conflict situations in various parts of the Middle East and North Africa, I get this kind of sense of determination. We will survive. We'll get through this. We're strong. And I think Palestinians present a unique example of it, from going all the way back to 1948 and building and developing the educational access and becoming what became the best educated group in the whole Arab region. I mean, they will, and you read about that, you hear about that, you hear about people suffering, families suffering terribly in Gaza, and just talking about, like, even I mentioned, we just want the kids to have the opportunity to go back to study. The little children saying, I just want to go back to school, I want to study, I want to study. So that's, I think that's an ongoing thing that should give us some hope. But at the same time, I think we should also be very pessimistic. I mean, I think, especially in the case of Gaza, what's happened is so catastrophic, and I don't think it's over yet. So, it's very hard to imagine, how this totally shattered and destroyed community can, rebuild its facilities. I mean, I remember Dr. Dalal mentioned the Islamic University in Gaza. I remember going there, talking to students there, and amazing access, such important spaces and debates going on, and it's all gone. All these things have been destroyed. How do you rebuild that? I mean, I imagine children studying in a tent, and they will, if that's what they have to do. But I mean, it's exceptionally difficult, and they need all the support they can get. I mean, on the question also of research methods, I think that's also very important. That's, of course, completely different. And I think research methods are changing and developing all the time as we, as I was teaching and talking to students, and all the time. And feminism is very debatable. I wrote recently an article about what does feminism mean? Do we all call ourselves feminists? I mean, what do we all mean by that, and how it takes different forms and different shapes in different environments, and how that is. Now, I think methodology, even in Western settings, is becoming more nuanced and more thoughtful, and Western researchers are being exposed to more innovative and exploratory methods. So, I mean, I think that is going along now. but yeah, I mean, there's always a lot of scope for change and development, and I hope we will. I hope we'll see that in response to situations as they emerge. And I think, again, Gaza presents a very interesting case. The case of Gaza has shocked many Western feminists who have been unable to adequately respond to that crisis. And I think that's something that we all need to reflect upon, very deeply. So, but thank you very much for your comments, Dr. Ben Othman.
Thank you, Professor Holt. And, this tension and dynamic between theory and practice and, real life and some ideas we academics have about how the world works or how the world should work, and when they're tested by events is one we keep going back to in feminism and other issues. Please, Dr. Dalal, would you like to respond to Dr. Raoudha? I think Dr. Dalal has to leave in a few minutes, so I will give her the floor, and then we'll move on to audience comments.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Layla. Actually, I have some interesting thing to say about to be more precise about the education in Palestine and how can we be pessimistic about the issue. I just want to go back with you a little bit at the time in the second Intifada. If you can remember, the majority of you had lived the second Intifada. I witnessed the second Intifada. I was 16 years old when the siege around Ramallah was conducted by Ariel Sharon at that time. And I had to walk to my school for 4 hours a day. 4 hours a day. I was walking like mountains and checkpoints and everything only to reach my school. Why I'm saying this? I'm saying this for two reasons. The first reason is that it's not the first time that the Palestinians are witnessing such a horrible, let's say, scholarcide, if we can say like this. It's not only a genocide, but it's something that is deeply touching our educational system and so on. So it's not the first time that we are witnessing such a horrible occasions. And when my doctor and my colleague had spoken about the Islamic University. The Islamic University is one of the best universities in Palestine. Actually, it's always like its rank is always number 1 or number 2. But it had started from tents. Like the Islamic bloc used to be a tent. So we don't have any problem with reconducting our educational system. It's something that is built in our minds. We have no doubt that we are going to recreate our educational system. And we believe in something else, which is very important. Now I'm trying to mix between the Western methodology and let's say new methodologies or the methodologies that we believe in. We have something that's called barakah. We believe in barakah. We believe that in a little pieces of things that we have, we can construct a lot. We can gain a lot of, let's say, education and knowledge. And to get back to Raoudha's question about she had some concerns about whether the girls would be more deprived from education more than boys. I can guarantee you that in Palestine, we don't have such a thing. Actually, the percentage of educated females in Palestine, females now are occupying more than 65% of university students, 65%, which is the highest amount even in all around the whole world. So I'm not afraid about this issue, to be more precise, in Palestine. I can't talk about other regions because I'm not expert in other regions, but I'm talking about Palestine. In the first Intifada, not the second one, the first Intifada from 1987 until 1992, the educational system was closed. The Israelis had, the military forces had closed all the universities in Palestine, and they were controlling all the educational system, even schools in Palestine. What had happened? Nothing. We had our own resistance mechanism and we educated our children. I was born in 1986. So I'm a child of the first Intifada in Palestine. And now, alhamdulillah, I'm doing my postdocs. It's not a problem. In Palestine, we believe that nothing will restrict us from continuing our education. And boys and girls, females and females, we don't have any problem with these issues. So one last thing I would like to add, please, Dr. Layla. is that one good methodology that I found it would be appropriate to use, which is the testimonial. I've read a lot of literature about testimonial in Latin America. This methodology is so exciting. It is taking the the storytelling from a marginalized place to a central place. So it is a good methodology to use in order to talk about agency, because until now we are separating between women agency and the day life resistance mechanism of surveillance. If you want to know the real agency about women during wars and conflict zones, you should need to use new methodologies like testimonial and other methodologies. We cannot separate between agency and day life resistance that women are facing in conflict zones or in war zones, in genocide, or even in normal places. So I think that maybe it's a good start to not separate between agency and day life resistance. We can't underestimate the day life resistance that women are doing and facing in every day and say, oh, it's nothing. It's only a mechanism of survival. While it is also a huge, let's say, a huge concept such as agency is centered in the center of such a day life resistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dalal, and that's a good recommendation. Also, we've all heard the concept, in the term and the concept of sumud, and I was actually wondering about, your thoughts on that as like maybe, an epistemological tool or some kind of, is it a useful concept as, for explaining or interpreting things? But I don't know if you have time to talk about that or not. Dalal?
Actually, yes. This term, as I've told you, it's always a pleasure to use from our own terms. Why? Because terms are not only concepts, they're not only methodological approaches, or they're not only like, let's say, educational system. No. These concepts hold emotional, let's say, background. These concepts such as sumud and baraka, which is sumud, yani can be translated to like resilience, but it's not resilience. It's more than resilience. It's a combination between resistance and resilience at the same time. It's considering resilience as part of resistance, not as a part of survival mechanism, let's say. So yeah, definitely, if we go back and use our own terms as methodologies or as not only methodologies, but epistemologies and even ontologies to start our academic search accordingly, I think we will see wonders. We can use those terms rather than use resilience, for example. We can use sumud rather than using day life resistance. Maybe we can use other concepts and so on. It's a long story to tell, but I'm definitely with using such terms because it reflects the real emotion and methodology that the indigenous people, like the place, are using.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's good to know. And you've confirmed our emphasis in Demos on local knowledge and, the importance of that to consider, the challenges of, different Arab societies, political and in this case, security, civic, etc. Thank you very much, Dr. Dalal.